You know, having these interviews, I mean, I knew that they were there for years. They've been in the vault, as it were. And asking myself the question, do I address this? And I felt that I needed to. I had a responsibility to talk about this. And that I think that the film's called The Israel Dilemma. But if you think about what's going on, the Bible tells us that there are references to the nation of Israel, and it says, you know, if kind of through Abraham, it says, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And so, what does that mean?
Hello there.
Don't have a good day. Have a great day.
Talk to me, Goose.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
Why so serious?
World! I could do this all day.
Are you watching closely?
Welcome everybody to the One Eyed Film Podcast. I'm your host Seth Mossberg, and I'm sitting here today with Tim Mahoney, the founder and visionary of Thinking Man Films. You're best known for the Patterns of Evidence movies. The seventh one is releasing a week from this episode dropping, November 13th, 14th, and 17th. And I've had the pleasure of working for Thinking Man Films for a few months now, and I'm excited to talk with Tim today. Thanks for sitting down with me today.
Seth, it's great to be with you. It's cool you got your own podcast.
Yeah, just a hobby, and I like it's an excuse to talk with my friends weekly about stuff we love. So I wanted to start off asking you what your favorite movie is. Not your movie, but like what's something that is either a guilty pleasure, an inspiration, what you think is objectively the best movie in pop culture. What would you say to that?
Oh, that's a great. Thanks for a hard question. You know, I don't know if I have a favorite, but I do have favorite styles of films. You know, I like historical. I like seeing films that can, you know, tell the past. I think I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it's a Ridley Scott film. You know, it's Kingdom. I'm trying to think of the name of the film, but it was. Well, I think the Kingdom of Heaven. I really thought was an amazing film. Just how Ridley Scott was able to, you know, portray history. You know, it had an adventure. It was quite a big film, and so those types of films, I think I'm impressed with Ridley Scott's ability to do historical, you know, films. And the other one would be, which was his Gladiator. You know, that was an amazing, you know, film.
Yeah.
How he pulled that off. You know.
Do you plan on seeing Gladiator 2? It's coming out in like a couple weeks.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to see it. Yeah.
People have been interested in, like, the trailer was, if you had taken all of the music away, it looked like Gladiator. It's hard to mess that up, but they had like a rap song over it, and it felt very modern as opposed to kind of what you're talking about, the old historical type of movie that the first Gladiator was.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes I'm cautious about, you know, watching certain films. I have to think about it for a while. You know, I hold off on certain films, but I am interested in story and narrative, and about why story is so important. And one of the things that, as I took some time this year to think about, because I'm asking people to donate, you know, to help me make films. And as I thought and prayed about films and story, I started to realize that human beings are the only creatures that actually, I think, have story. You know, dogs and cats aren't telling each other stories, even though we've got stories about dogs and cats talking. You know, it's not true.
Yeah, it's still human made.
Yeah, and so I think it's really important to understand that we were created for story. And what's going on right now in the culture is the stories that we have are not the kind of stories that are really as much virtuous stories. They're broken, they're anti-hero stories. Heroes that aren't really heroes, but they're at the center of the story. I mean, in other words, what I would call virtuous people. So I think that's why it's so important to hone the skill of being a filmmaker and becoming a better storyteller, because we need better stories.
Yeah, my personal look at creativity, as I've kind of dipped my toes in a lot of creative pools, whether it's animation or editing or drawing or podcasting or whatever, is realizing that the desire to create is a reflection of us being made in the image of God, the greatest storyteller ever told, and that's just us reflecting his qualities. He's still telling his story now, and we get to have this opportunity as his image bearers to tell other stories through different mediums.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you start to look at nature and how certain animals are created, like when you look at certain underwater, certain fish or whatever it might be, you're going, how in the world did this get created? So beautiful. Insects with amazing, detail. Birds that can do certain things. God is incredibly creative. And then, I go out in the country and I can look up at the stars. I'm thinking about getting a telescope and looking at, galaxies and getting into that a little bit more. But it's amazing. That's where the verse says, "What is man that you are mindful of him?" And so I think that I've been just learning how to tell story. I've really struggled I would say, entire adult life. I mean, for some people it maybe comes easier. I made lots of commercials and I told little stories, but to get your head around telling a whole story is really taken me some time to understand it. Now I'm getting more comfortable with multiple, more complex, investigations and documentaries. I can sense where the story is going. We created a structure with patterns of evidence films where what we're doing is we're looking for a pattern. And once we came up with that became the spine of how to make the film. And then a part of that spine, the flesh, the human, the heart of it has to be why should I care? Why should I care about this? What is it? How does it impact me? And often when I look at Amazon, because we have 2 films on there, and there's close to 3,000 likes. I don't know if it's 2,800 or whatever, and you read the comments through. You realize that if you can figure out how to tell a story, and that story took 12 years to figure out how to make, and Steve Law, who I work with, he is a good writing partner. And sometimes if you can find the right writing partner to help you, he's really good at, he gives me a ton of information and I have to make a decision. What's the direction? How are we going to shape this story? He's the structural engineer of saying, well, these are the pillars that hold this story, this documentary together. And then I try to determine how to, weave it. And it's really about a weave. And then you start to look at, in the documentary area, what should the weave look like? Who else should participate in this? And sometimes I'll get up to, 15 to 20, 23 interviews, and then we'll go out and capture them, and they add different components to it. I like having opposing views. And trying to listen, even though I'll come up with a sense of direction for the film. I still like hearing from different people, because the films on the Patterns series are films that are asking the question, is there any evidence that this happened?
I was going to ask, what is the thesis of the Patterns film for those of my audience who might not know? I think that's what it is that's mostly the theme that you go with, and it's a variation of it is on the posters, and it's like,
how do we know? For example, people question, did the events of the Bible really happen? And so how would you look for that? Some people are just saying there's no evidence for it. And I'd say, well, what evidence would you look for? So the genius that we finally came to, which I think is the intellectual, property idea, was, can we find a pattern? In the first film, it was the Exodus had 5 points. I think it was arrival of the Israelites in Egypt. Can we find evidence of that? Can we find them multiplying? Can we find them being suffering? And then there would be enslavement, I think was one, and then there would be the destruction of Egypt, because the Bible says plagues came, and then they left Egypt and they conquered the Promised Land. Can we find those 5 points? What makes it strong is that you're looking for a sequence. So they got to be in that sequence. Can you find that sequence, those 5 things in the archaeology?
Yeah.
And once you do that, in that particular case, I like to create visual objects or visuals that you can see and that look interesting. And the Wall of Time became a tool, which is a fantastic tool because now I see it. And I go, oh, if I can see it, I can say, oh, I understand with what you're talking about. When people tell me the Middle Bronze Age or, these different dynasties or whatever, it's hard to know what they're talking because I have no reference. I don't know any of that. But if I can see it, I can quickly grasp it. So we are trying to create visuals, both with maps and with the Wall of Time, and that became a real powerful tool that you could basically manage complex ideas and make them simple.
Yeah, and the Wall of Time is, I think, a great creation of yours, and being able to use those colors, and I'll put references on the video for people to see that this is over here, but it's supposed to be over here. Why is this not working? And that's what you go through the film.
Yeah.
And then maps are, I think, universally helpful.
Yeah.
I got to work on some of those for the Israel Dilemma, which is pretty cool for me, but just being able to visualize it in movie form, in a cinematic storytelling form. You have reenactments and you have a story. You're posing these questions, you're answering some of them, kind of leading on to like, hey guys, this is the point we're getting at. I think is a great way to a pattern that you've made for yourself for these now 7 movies that are coming out.
Yeah, and that. Understanding that, and it's like building something. If you could come up with a style in which to build something, and there are certain shows that have, let's say, a murder mystery. The show opens up and somebody's doing something, and then they, somebody murders them, and the rest of the show is who did it, and so that's a format that you're trying to come to, and. So for me, it helped to know, well, what is the format and why should I care? What's at stake? And it took, like I said, I don't know why I was such a slow learner, but it took a while. But I finally started to get a feel for it. And then when you can put more of a personal approach to it, in other words, I started telling more of my story, which I'd never told about my own family and the brokenness of my family into this. And because people are saying, well, why does it matter? Why do you care that it's true or not? It's because my family went through terrible trauma with my folks' divorce and my dad's violent behavior, and my mother really trusted that God would be there, and I did too, and we saw him providing. And then so I go off to Egypt and I hear that it didn't happen. There's no evidence of this. Well, that's the foundation of the Bible. I mean, it's one of the foundational events, the Exodus.
Yeah. Could you walk me through the timeline of making Exodus, because then after Exodus you launched into the other movies, but you said 12 years up until Exodus there was a story, and I know that you have archives and almost a decade of footage.
2 decades.
2 decades. Well, where did that start?
Yeah.
When did you actually say, hey, I should be recording this, and then being able to come up with the idea of let's make a full movie?
Well, I think if anyone who's watching this and they want to be a filmmaker or whatever, there's sometimes sort of a sense of like you should be doing something. And so I didn't know what it was. And I decided at that time I would just help some other people since I wasn't clear as to what I should be doing. And I heard about some guys searching for the Exodus. And I thought, well, I'll help them, And helping them turned into actually saying I'm so invested in this now that I'm going to actually go. So for about a year and a half or so, I was trying to help somebody that had another film. I think it was called Search for the Red Sea Crossing. But in the midst of all that, I became really interested and felt that I was supposed to do this. And in 2002, now the World Trade Centers were attacked in 2001. So the next half a year later, I decide to go with a man by the name of Dr. Leonard Moeller, and we go to Egypt. And we raised the money and went there to search for the Exodus. And so from 2002 to then, next year, 2003, I go to Saudi Arabia. because crazy. Now most people can't get into Saudi Arabia, I was sitting in my living room. It was probably in like January or something, and Dr. Moeller says, "I believe I'm going to go to Saudi Arabia someday, and I know it's impossible to get in there." And he says, "Would you go with me?" I'm like, "That's pretty crazy, because I mean, I know you can't get into Saudi Arabia."
Yeah.
And by 4 or 5 months later, we had gotten permission to go to Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And to film. And I asked if I could bring my camera, and they said no problem. And so that was my second year. And I came out of Saudi Arabia with I took amazing footage in Saudi Arabia, but I didn't come out with anything because it was taken. Because once they said, "Oh, you're making this film about Moses and the Israelites," well, we don't want that to happen. And so then you're like, well, what was that all about? All I got was still photos. But I made an agreement with people who had been there. So what has happened is there are sometimes projects that you start that don't end for, that you don't get to for a while. But what I didn't want to do is just forget about it and just like never address that. So that Exodus film then, eventually I made a film in, I think, 2005 that I thought was the film. And I didn't care for it. I had some help from other people to help me tell the story. And when we got done, it was kind of a comedic version. And then I didn't think that was right. And so I just kept working on it. And in 2007, I ended up going to Israel. And that's when I got more interviews. And then I kept traveling around the country, going to Europe to interview scholars. I went to England and filmed in different places and just tried to really build this library as I was trying to understand how to tell this story. So I think the issue was being a journalist. I was a filmmaker who was learning to become a journalist. And so on one side, I leaned towards the filmmaking side of photography and that. On the other side, I needed to be more of a journalist to basically tell the story. So it took 12 years, and finally we got it out into film festivals. And then I would watch the audience during film festivals, how they reacted to the film. And then I would adjust it. And there was one part about 3/4 of the way through the film where I could tell the audiences were just slumping, yeah. And I go, this is the reason I did not win like award at a film festival. And I said, we got to change this music. And once I changed that music, never a problem again. It was just a piece of music that was not the right piece.
Yeah.
The way I entered into that last lap of the film was not working.
Yeah, it's all the little pieces, and there's a lot of moving parts. And when you can find the one that's creaking or whatever, then you can figure out what's not going well with the whole thing and fix it. So.
Right.
So you mentioned you went to Israel, and from some sneak peeks that have been on your website and YouTube channel of the Israel Dilemma, the opening of the movie is an interview that you had with both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former President Shimon Peres.
Yeah, Shimon, yeah.
Shimon. And
they were powerful interviews, yeah.
Yeah. And I heard that there was a story behind actually being in the interview, like it might have gone a little bit long. Is that something that...
Yeah, I can tell you about. So, I think in my particular case, I was shocked that I was sitting there with the former prime minister, because he was in between being prime minister. He's been prime minister, I think, at least 3 times. But he was still, a politician. And I went to Knesset. And you have to go through really tight security. I mean, they check everything, almost take your camera apart practically to make sure there's nothing explosive in it. And so I had read the book, I think it's called Durable Peace, that he had written. And he had talked about his grandfather, Nathan, who lived, I believe, in Poland. And when he was a young boy, a teenager, he and his little brother were at a train station trying to get home from yeshiva, a school they were going to. And some teenagers came there. They were going to beat them up. And his grandfather told his little brother to run, and he stayed, and he was beaten unconscious. As he was being beaten, he vowed that he would get out of Poland as soon as he could. And he was the only the only surviving member of his family, because he did get out of Poland. The rest of them were killed in the Holocaust. So that was I knew that story. So when I asked Netanyahu about, what was his family and who taught him the Bible, he said, my grandfather. And I said, Nathan. And when I said Lord Nathan, all of a sudden he knew that I had done some work and research. And from that point on, the schedule was out the window. And we just talked for about 50 minutes. And we talked, and I've learned with interviews, I have an outline, but I look into his eyes. I didn't look at other things. I tried to keep communicating. I just looked down and say, I went with the conversation went. So it was more like we're having a conversation. I don't even know if he knew exactly what the time was, but there was news crews that were supposed to be being filmed at that time, and they were throwing things around and trying to interrupt the interview. And Dr. Mueller was standing in the doorway like this, holding them off, saying, no, this is a very important interview. You're not allowed in here, you know. They weren't going to interrupt that interview. And he, because of him, he allowed me to get that important interview. So that sat in the can. I used little pieces of it, but these interviews were hardly tapped into. And then last year when this attack came, and then when I saw what was happening at Harvard and the other colleges with the anti-Semitism, I was like, well, what's going on here? Why, does anybody know where did this all originate from? And that's when I went back and we, Steve and I talked, and we said, we need to make a film. It's about who is this nation called Israel? And that's how we made the Israel Dilemma.
I was going to ask if you were planning the Israel Dilemma before October of last year, or if that spawned it.
That spawned it, yeah.
Okay.
I was probably going to do something different. I was going to probably continue from, into the Promised Land, because we've got footage and archaeology about all that. So, but I'm finding too that it's important to make films that actually people are interested in seeing. I mean, there's an agenda you can have and say, well, I want to make this film because it's connected to this, but is it how do you make it compelling? I'm more now leaning towards, is this a film that people really are interested in seeing, or is it just something I want to make?
Yeah. I think anything with the label Israel is going to get eyes on it nowadays. So the October attacks on Israel last year really pushed this movie to be created, and because you already were sitting on all of this content from previous interviews and such, you were like, we can do this.
Yeah, it felt like I had a responsibility to help all of us understand what's going on here, because the Bible, it's called Patterns of Evidence, the Israel Dilemma, Ancient Prophecies. And so I'm not a theologian, but I do know that there are prophecies that were given. The prophecies that were given deal with Moses telling the Israelites before he dies that there's going to be blessings if you obey God, and there's going to be curses if you disobey him. And then he goes on to say that you will have a kingdom, but I'm going to warn you that you're going to break God's covenant. And this is what's going to happen. You're going to be destroyed as a nation. Your kingdom will be destroyed. You'll be scattered amongst the nations. You will be persecuted, but you will in the future return to the land. Having these interviews, I mean, I knew that they were there for years. They've been in the vault, as it were. And asking myself the question, do I address this? And I felt that I needed to. I had a responsibility to talk about this. And that I think that the film's called The Israel Dilemma. But if you think about what's going on, the Bible tells us that there are references to the nation of Israel. And it says, if kind of through Abraham, it says, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And so, what does that mean? And in the next film, this is a two-part film. The next film is called Promised Return, and Ancient Prophecies and Promised Return. And I think that we're going to look at, the premise is, can we see God acting in history through the nation of Israel? And that's what this film is doing. It's searching for that. And so that's the reason why I did it. I feel like I had it, the ability to do it. And then I saw it come together in a really unique way. We have these. We actually filmed here in the studio a lot of recreations with green screen, and we filmed with actors. We had costumes, and then we were able to composite them into sets. They were small sets. They were. I'm trying to think. What do you call them again? Miniatures. Miniatures. So that the temple scene that we had was about 4 feet tall. And then bring them out into daylight and film them, and then interior scenes of a palace. I'd never worked with miniatures before, and once you start doing it, you're like, this is pretty cool.
Yeah. And they're kind of an older format of movie making because everyone's like, just use CG, but you don't have that at your disposal all the time. And they're honestly, miniatures are pretty cool to be forcing perspective and all that.
Well, what's interesting is that miniatures, in my mind, and what I've had, is actually look more real than some of the CG.
Because it is.
Yeah.
It is real.
I mean, it's just like, wow, that looks like a real stone wall. And that looks like a real courtyard, and that looks like a real exterior, because it takes light differently. It's a physical object that actually looks good.
Yeah.
And so that part, and I have to be honest. It's like, boy, this is really risky, because we're in Minnesota. I think, trying to find actors that would look right, and then getting hair and makeup and costumes, and trying to make it all look good. And I haven't dirtied up our costumes like made them, it's an awful lot to try to get all the costumes to look authentic, because you're trying to get them to be the right look, but then so they look like they've been, it's almost like you have to run them through the wash a bunch of times or something to get them kind of a little bit more worn.
Yeah. I think the timing of all of the Israel dilemma and making of it has been pretty cool. Now that I know that you started right after the attacks last year, having sat on all of this content and archived, vaulted, whatever word you want to use, being able to produce it in 13 months, produce and release it, is pretty crazy. And I think that's not something that anyone can do.
Yeah, it's actually less than that. Yeah, I think we probably really got started more. I think it's probably closer to about 10 months, because because we started writing, there was writing that was going on, but it changed, and it was like focused. And I think that's the one thing that I feel needs to happen more is the writing needs to be sharp. Get an outline, try to write much sharper to what you need to do. Get to a script, and then we try not to. Because we have a lot of footage that's, try to make the film as fast as you can. And what I mean by that is to see if it works. Because there are times when we used to spend weeks writing scripts. Then you put it down and you go, that doesn't work. That's not very interesting. And I don't know, it just took a long maturing process to see, because in many ways you want the film to flow. I mean, you just want it to be entertaining in the flow and what's the visuals and everything. So trying to get to a finish line, trying to get it laid out quicker is easier for me to see if it's going to work or what's missing.
Sure. Have you received any drama politically about, like I said, the name Israel gets a lot of attention right now. Has there been any, or do you expect any of that, especially next week when the movie releases?
Well, I don't want a lot of drama.
Yeah, nobody wants it, but...
Yeah, sometimes that's good for publicity, but I think that there's an obligation that we understand what's going on, because this isn't going away. According to the Bible, and according, I think, to what we see, this problem is really complex, and it's going to be in the forefront for quite some time. Now, there are also different views in Christianity. Some people view Israel as the thermometer of God acting in history, and that's why when it came back as a nation in 1948, people were saying, that's the second film, is that, wait a minute, this event, this covenant that God made with the people of Israel has happened, and it's being fulfilled twice. So we're going to look at the first time it happened. The next film is going to look at the second time that it happened and what leads us up to today.
Sure.
But there are these prophecies about the nations, in Zechariah, I think it is, coming against Israel. They'll be, and Jerusalem. So I think there are people that, if you know that these exist, then you've got to figure out, well, what's going on here.
I want to switch from the Israel dilemma. Again, it's coming out the week after this episode releases, which is very exciting. But you're also working on the American Miracle. Technically, you finished it, but it's releasing next year. American Miracle is a branch off of the Patterns of Evidence. Still under the Thinking Man Films umbrella, but it's Heroic Pictures. You made that.
Heroic Pictures, yeah. It's actually Thinking Man Films is more of the documentary side,
Okay.
and Heroic Pictures is more of the drama.
Oh, my bad. It's Mahoney Media. That's
that's the parent company.
umbrella
Yeah.
one. Yep.
And I started by making commercials, and I didn't know what we would do. I wanted to make films, but Mahoney Media became the very first company.
Mm-hmm.
It's the parent company, and then Thinking Man makes the documentaries and does distributing as well. And then the Heroic Pictures, American Miracle is our very first film, and it's based upon a book by Michael Medved. He wrote a best-selling New York Times bestseller book called The American Miracle, God's Providential Hand on America. And he came to me and said, Tim, could you help me turn this into something? He didn't know what it was. And I looked at it, I was pretty intimidated because it covers the first book. There's 2 books, and the first book covers from like the Pilgrims all the way up to like the Civil War, I think. And it's like, well, how do you get a handle on that? And so I met and we discussed it, and we decided to take one section, which was the American Revolution and the story of George Washington. So we pretty much focused on George Washington's life, and all the way through to the Revolutionary War, why people were fighting, and it was really pertinent for today, and why they were fighting, and what they came to accomplish, which is the Constitution. And that's what you would say holds us together. It's the document that makes America what it is.
What's different about how you made the American Miracle versus Patterns movies? Because the American Miracle has more reenactments, still has some documentary style where you have the experts, kind of almost narrating it throughout the whole movie, and then that's different where the Patterns movies are mostly narration-led and not as heavy, even though it does have reenactments.
Yep.
There's a lot more story from the characters of the movie in American Miracle.
Right, we had more freedom to do that, and I really wanted to do more drama. But the one reason why we did the documentary part of it is because some of this is so unusual. So it's God acting in nature, God acting in so an army will come up and it's going to attack, and all of a sudden a snowstorm comes out of nowhere and stops the attack, and forces or multiple times weather was working to the advantage of Washington and the Continental Army, and the British were suffering. And they started wondering, what's going on here? They could see there's something more than just natural. There's something supernatural that was affecting them. And there's just a multitude of instances where that happened. And so that's what we started to look at. So there's different, important events, but there's also the African American story, which today is an important story to include. And there's a story about Peter Salem, and he was at the Battle of Bunker Hill, and we included him, and Cameron Arnett, who's been in a number of movies. I think he was actor in Star Trek, and Cameron was in this new movie called The Forge.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so he plays Peter Salem, and then we've got Nicole C. Mullen, and she plays Mumbet Freeman, which is a true story. It's the beginning of the abolitionist movement, and they did a fantastic job. We also talked about the 3/5 person in the Constitution and the whole issue of slavery, because there's other groups that are saying that the Founding Fathers were just trying to keep slavery going. What's great about this film is by adding these other scholars from Princeton, Robbie George is from Princeton, and Akil Amir he's from Yale. But by having these other scholars, really top-notch scholars, Pulitzer Prize winners, and that they help to verify the events, and we even got Richard Dreyfuss, and he's concerned about America and civics, and so he was in the film as well. Michael Medved is hosting it, and so it was a big production. I learned an awful lot on making it. A lot of special effects shots in there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So you mentioned all of the people who star in this. You even have Kevin Sorbo, Pat Boone, Rachel Day Hughes. I saw her in I Heard the Bells. Libby Smallbone, sister to For King and Country brothers, and a bunch of different people. Did it excite you to have that level of people, that number of people working on something this big?
It was wonderful to have that, yeah. And a movie is one of these things that you are casting almost as you go. I mean, I was driving casting to the location, trying to fill, because there was like 80 parts, 80 to 90 parts I had to cast for. The doctor at Valley Forge, or, of these different people, who was going to play Daniel Webster, all these different characters that had to be casted. Then there were the extras. Then there were the locations. We actually filmed at many of the same locations that the events happen at. And sometimes people never actually been able to film, like at Mount Vernon. We filmed in Mount Vernon. Wow. Actually we're able to film with George Washington, the actor, in the actual chair that George Washington sat in, which hadn't been done that we know of, So we had a lot of wonderful things that came together.
And Philadelphia Hall, or Independence Hall in Philadelphia, I believe that was another one. Was that on in location?
Well, we went there, but it was very difficult to film there because you can only film after hours, and you can't use any of their furniture. So you have to remove the furniture and bring it in. So we went to Houston Christian University, and they built a replica, and we were the very first group that was allowed to film there. And so they had everything: the tables, the pens, the chairs, Washington's special chair with the sun rising. All of that was made available to us, and they had a college break, and we were able to take that October break. Is almost a year ago, just about a year ago that we did that filming there.
Yeah, that's really cool. One of my final questions is kind of a twist on a question that we like to ask as co-hosts. We ask each other this when we're talking about movies. We ask, how did you see God's hand in this movie? Whether it's a theme that we saw or something that happened in the making of the movie that's just reflective of what we were talking about before, of the image that we bear of God and the storytelling. But I'm going to twist it and ask you, how have you seen God's hand work in your films, whether it's through you and realizing something, or people who have said this has affected me in this way, something like that?
Yeah, I think that one thing I'm noticing is the providence, in other words, the presence of God. God provided in these different films. I had to take the risk to step out and go, try to make the film, even when I didn't have all the answers or all the resources. And in some cases, we had an agreement to make the American Miracle, but we didn't have the actors, we didn't have the people, and there was challenges to try to cast the right actors and to know that they're going to be good enough quality. Because if you can have one actor in a group of good actors, it can pull the whole performance down. So I really saw God provide amazingly for us in locations where we had a group of Canon people that came on, I think it was Labor Day, and they gave up their Labor Day and they came, and we were able to film a lot of really important scenes, both with the cannons firing and then on green screens for surrender scenes and all that. And you could say, well, it's just kind of like the movie we're making. It's just a series of coincidences that we were able to happen. But God was allowing all those things to come together with the different actors that we were able to find. I called up Pat Boone and just said, hey, I'd like to have him consider playing Thomas Jefferson. And then Nicole C. Mullen I had no idea how good she could act. And then we just continued to develop. And then Jim Gallagher, who was our historian, he was the historian on Turn and on John Adams and on Lincoln with Spielberg. And he became my right-hand person to help me make sure all the costumes are correct, that historically the film was doing what it needed to do. You know, it was accurate. And he did say to me, he says, you're like one of the first directors that has ever listened to me completely. I mean, because people that are making other movies are just trying to make a creative movie. I was trying to make a historically creative movie. That would be accurate.
So the non-coincidences, the things that seem to be like, oh, it just falls into my lap, but you have a greater faith in that, and it happens too often to actually be coincidences. I think that's really a powerful testimony.
Yeah. Well, there's one last thing I'll add, is that on the way there I brought a UTV on a trailer from Minnesota all the way to Pennsylvania into Virginia area. And I was driving with a lot of weight, and I just thought, because I had my car checked out before I went, and they said everything was fine. But what happened was, when we got there, I just thought, I feel like my engine light should have came on. I should get my oil changed. I brought my vehicle in to get the oil changed, and the serviceman said, "You have a serious problem here." And he showed me my tire. He says, your front tires are horrible. My tires were so worn that the metal straps were like poking out. And I had no idea. You couldn't see it from the outside. And however, the service people that I brought it in before I went on the trip didn't see it or what. But I could have had a serious blowout going down a sharp hill, because I went down a lot of them with all that weight. And I just thought that was God's provision and protection, because those tires, I had thousands of miles I was putting on them, and I could have been in a terrible, serious accident. And so once again, I was very thankful for that coincidental oil light that came on right at the right time.
Yeah, that's amazing. My last question is, what do you think the future of the Patterns of Evidence films look like? Doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon, and I know you have a lot of ideas, but what's something that you want to accomplish with the series before it's done in an abstract amount of time, whenever that is?
There's two things. There's a lot, and I don't think I'm slowing down. I don't think I'm supposed to, and it's a little bit hard because there's a lot of ideas, and what you learn is that taking a step like The Israel Dilemma was taking a step of faith in making that film, even when we didn't have the resources. Still don't have the resources for it, but we still made the film. We have a nonprofit at patternsofevidence.com. If people want to go see the Israel Dilemma movie, they can go to patternsofevidence.com, and they can go see a trailer and go see that movie. We also have a foundation that people can give to, which helps us make these films. I think that what I'm sensing now is I want to take the films, the content, and I'm working now on dramatizing it with actors, and it's going to be more of a drama. So it's like Indiana Jones meets the world of Marvel comics, in a sense. It'll have multiple characters and different archaeologists, scientists, and we're going to basically reveal what we've already found, but it's going to be dramatized. It's going to be a lot more, action. And that's the vision. And then we've got, there's more to the other line of reasoning too. The other Patterns films have more films to be made that we want to get to. I'm trying to get to making the films fast because of sharp writing. Trying to get to the writing fast, and then let's just cut this material together.
I mean, you kind of proved that with the 10-month turnaround on Israel Dilemma. So I think that's pretty impressive, and something that you have the ability to do with all of the stuff you're sitting on, all of the interviews and such. So, and the ability to now, I know this studio is a little newer. I don't remember exactly how new or when you moved, but you now have your space to do the green screen stuff like you did with Israel Dilemma and all that. It's really cool.
We need a little bigger one, but
that's true.
We need the ceiling because we run out of height, for certain shots.
You always need more room.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for talking with me today. I want to encourage listeners or watchers to go see The Israel Dilemma in theaters November 13th, 14th, and 17th. Visit patternsofevidence.com/Israel to get tickets. I know in my area, the Marcus Theaters and AMC picked it up through Iconic Events. But I think that's really cool, getting to see it on the big screen, and I'm excited to see a movie that I've already seen.
Yeah.
But there's a great story here, and I think it's super important to learn about Israel in this way, in this time that we're living in, and in an entertaining way that you've made the movie.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
If people wanted to follow us on American Miracle, they can go to AmericanMiracleMovie.com, AmericanMiracleMovie.com, and they can get sign up for updates on that.
Yeah, that's coming out in like 8 months or so.
Yeah.
Next July, I think.
June, July, yeah.
Yeah. So I know the focus is on Israel Dilemma right now, but soon that's going to be passed, and we'll look forward to The American Miracle. So, yeah, thank you for talking with me. Make sure you follow the podcast and all our socials on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all that stuff. Till next week, know that you're loved. God bless.